right. Next up, we have Danielle de Jager Loftus. And she is the Associate Professor at the University of South Dakota and liaison to the College of Fine Arts. She manages USD's digital library and institutional repository, as well as other digital programs. De Jager Loftus has led presentations and published articles not only about digital initiatives, but also about collaborating with other librarians and the greater community. And she will be speaking about DEI and accessibility in the library. Let's Ranganathan. Please tell me, say it right out loud.
Ranganathan.
Got to do with it.
That's awesome. Okay. So I wanted to talk about Ranganathan and also USD, what we're doing at USD for accessibility. And to help me think through these kind of things, it helps me to look at the law and the legislation. So this will be kind of a bigger picture discussion, and I really appreciate the last presentation because a lot of things will fit into that, and other, like Laura's presentation, will fit into this too. So I have to confess that I was one of those librarians who, having gained my master's in the 2000s, early 2000s, I was given very little exposures to the teachings of Ranganathan, other than I had to study, his 5 laws in order to pass a test. So, anyway, I don't know. I think different library programs do different things. But of course, in having worked in a large library for many years before I qualified professionally as a librarian, a lot of the mature librarians would talk about his creed and keep it close to their professional hearts. And I knew of his 5 laws, but I never really studied them closely, nor had any occasion to read any of his wider writings on librarianship. And more importantly, I think the dated language in Ranganathan's 5 laws was off-putting to me, and I didn't have an occasion or desire to reflect on them earlier in my career. This is a screenshot of the book, and I got it off of Hati Trust, and it was published in 1931. And I think it's really crazy that we're talking about Ranganathan and DEI, but for many who enter the field of librarianship, the 5 laws present a framework that we can relate to personal philosophy and practice. And I would like to note that this appreciation of Ranganathan's 5 laws should not be seen as a celebration of him, or we should call him a universal champion of diversity. Even though within his view of the importance of libraries and librarians, he describes many people as unfit for certain jobs, like he says the deaf and the maimed, the stammerers and hunchbacks, and his attitude towards library workers shows a level of classism with clear preference for the librarian, and he's not very respectful of other staff members. But this is the 30s, so remember that. So, revisiting Ranganathan's 5 laws shows how modern practices and considerations are related to DEI in librarianship and serve as an extension and recontextualization of ideas that form the basis for lots of modern library principles. His principles prioritize the user and their library experience in a manner that can guide modern practice and ensure that we build environments and conditions that allow users to thrive pursuits that are at the very heart of DEI and accessibility. So, the first law, Ranganathan's, it's simple. Books are for use, and the idea that materials acquired by libraries for the users, not to be locked away or untouched, creates a philosophy for inclusive access for the librarian. And he outlines a variety of patron needs that relate directly to our current conversations around inclusivity and accessibility in the library, from hours to stack heights to aisle widths, and all framed in the expectations that creating a space for effective use of books requires creating an environment that users find accommodating. Expectations of what constitutes effective accommodation in libraries have changed since Ranganathan's time, of course, especially in the US with the 1990 passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. While the Act only outlines the minimum requirements for compliance, putting the user first by asserting that books are for use should encourage us to think more about what users need for access, not just what we are required to provide. And this was noted by Stephanie Bonchak from UC Boulder in a 2017 MLA presentation. So universal design, as you probably know, is designing for a wide variety of needs rather than merely offering accommodations for individual users or groups. In music librarianship, the application of critical music, information literacy, is one tool to deep education. And this quote is from an MLA Notes publication from a few years ago. The emphasis in music scholarship and performance on historically canonized materials creates both an opportunity and a challenge in diversifying music library instruction. Helping students reconsider dependence on a canon of works and composers whose staying power is often the result of privilege on the part of the composer is the first step towards teaching our users to think independently about the role of diversity in music, and requires deliberate efforts to teach users to discover the full range of library materials. So Ranganathan's second law presents a perspective on how collections are built and how library workers help patrons to discover their specific book. And book, of course, can easily cover electronic media and other items, other publications easily. He describes this law as democratization of the public based on the assumption that education is for every person. With this model, materials must be selected with an inclusive mindset towards the potential user, recognizing that each user is an individual with individual needs. Adherence to this law means that a library should be a place where equity is a practice, not simply a value. In the modern music library, every activity, service, and space should ensure that any user can discover and acquire the sources that serve them where they are now, in person, online, or wherever. So, additional considerations. The second law also needs to be remembered because it reminds us to be impartial to our dealings with other users. We may not like their request, what they request from us. We may think a book or resource that they ask for is lowbrow, but we should never place our own prejudices in the way of access. And this is crucial if our prejudices are based on political or religious beliefs, and we must be careful to ensure that we represent the beliefs of other communities responsibly. Ensuring a collection is representative of the community that a librarian represents is vital. So here's an idea, and what Laura presented is perfect. So you could think about a pop-up library event for unrepresented represented composers, and it creates opportunities to interact with users in new contexts, which helps the music librarian to know patrons better and ideally anticipate what to inquire in a relevant manner. So I thought what Laura presented was perfect. And representation and staffing can create encounters where those who are new to the library or even new to libraries in general feel a sense of belonging when they interact with music library workers. The third law makes a strong case for inclusive and accessible practices in libraries. Imagining that every item has or will have a user creates a necessary consideration for the potential audiences for each item in the collection. And this law argues for deliberate inclusion of all potential users by recognizing that, given the opportunity, each should be able to discover materials relevant to their own needs in the collection. So collection development of course, is absolutely crucial to achieving the ideal of every book its reader. The continued work by music librarians and MLA to influence and interpret copyright and licensing is a key aspect of accessible digitization. So too are efforts to create and promote open access content and to apply information literacy frameworks to the complexity of information available online. Another idea, based on ethnicity or culture, a music librarian can have success by connecting with student groups with library ethnic or cultural collections, as Laura presented earlier. The third law also creates a case for extension services, those that bring in new users who do not yet have the ability or opportunity to use materials in the library. While many of Ranganathan's examples relate mostly to illiteracy, you can see how providing Braille scores, hiring multilingual staff to serve the library's key population groups, or training staff on things which can extend the music library's ability to serve the user in a way that is accessible to them. Extension in this context also applies to publicity and outreach in a targeted way. So on the surface, the fourth law, saving time of the reader, sounds like it relates to efficient wayfinding. However, if you dig deeper, you can see the DEI and accessibility applications of this law. Time-saving efforts may initially be intended to add convenience for any user, but can also have the added benefit of addressing the needs of the underserved user. Adding the ability to request materials from the stacks in the online catalog for delivery is a great convenience to all users. It also addresses the desire of users such as LGBTQIA+, to get access to materials without being physically in the library, something that might feel emotionally dangerous to some people. Topical wayfinding can help users find specific materials in the stacks, and it allows patrons quicker and easier access to print materials, but also allow hesitant users to find materials without expressing vulnerable needs to a staff member. Inclusive facilities can also save the time of the user. The placement of gender-neutral restrooms and nursing rooms in libraries can have a profound impact on the time management of users who need them by helping them to remain in the library for longer periods of time rather than forcing them to go elsewhere to seek facilities. Accessible stacks and furniture allow users with mobility needs to get right to work by pulling their own materials or studying at a table without needing to ask for additional intervention to rearrange furniture to create an appropriate study space. So librarians can't think of every accommodation, but it's important that we work out plans for users to serve themselves by designing for differences in needs rather than just responding to them as they come up. And I think this is one of the most important points in accessibility, creating services for everyone instead of waiting for an issue to come up or trying to fix something later. And that's really the concept, universal design, that's the issue right there. So we certainly know that in the field of music librarianship, things change all the time. And Ranganathan focuses on growth in a literal way, as in increase of scale, but also addresses growth as change, which he describes as variation and new forms. Thinking about classification, Ranganathan says that it needs to be flexible and hospitable to new topics and provide space for greater nuance when classifying materials about subjects that are in flux, as we see daily in topics related to identity. Flexibility doesn't have to be for the expansion of new classifications, but it should also allow for changes based on the desires and practices of cultures being described. For example, feedback from communities and fans of hip hop led to the application of the genre term hip hop in music, as opposed to the previously exclusive term of rap music, for recordings and scores to account for the full range of music in hip hop, which also includes DJing and turntabling. So this sensitivity reflects on one of the greatest areas of growth in the last century. Recognition that in description, you have to respect the authority of the content creator and not assume that we as librarians can characterize works better because we have professional library credentials. So, Ranganathan concludes his discussion with a summary that lays the groundwork for a library and a practice of library work that is founded in principles of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And to quote him, he says that the vital principles of the library is that it is an instrument of universal education and assembles together and freely distributes all tools of education and disseminates knowledge with their aid. So next I wanted to talk about what we have been doing at USD in terms of accessibility. And so I am on a committee of digital accessibility and for the digital accessibility for committee for USD. And we've been, it's been about 7 years now. So we look at the digital space, but I have a background in the physical accessibility as well. But so this is a typical statement that you probably have on your web pages specific to your institution. So I'm going to talk about ADA laws and Section 504 regulations. So ADA, Americans with Disabilities, of course, that became law in 1990, and what the ADA is, and like I said at the beginning, I think it's easy for me when I'm thinking about topics like this is to look at, what is the law, what are regulations, and how might they have affect the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. So the ADA is a civil rights law that prevents discrimination against individuals with disabilities in many areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and many public and private places that are open to the general public. And the U.S. Department of Education's 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 is designed to eliminate discrimination on the basis of handicap in any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So that's applicable to a lot of our institutions. So these are somewhat typical accessibility goals that you might find at your institution. So I will talk about the first bullet talks about site improve. I will talk about site improve in a bit. My USD is our portal, and Academos is our campus bookstore, the vendor that we use. And so that last bullet point, at the library, we are trying to negotiate accessibility statements into negotiations with library vendors. And this is an example of language. This content in this slide is from the Library Accessibility Toolkit from the Library Accessibility Alliance, or the LAA for short. And the LAA works with library vendors to improve usability of online resources for all users. So I will go to the toolkit, and I wanted to show you a little bit about it. There we go. It's continuously updated, so it's in a Google Doc, obviously, and
we can't see.
you can't see it. Okay.
It's showing the Zoom.
It is, but not on the screen.
Not on the screen. Maybe you should press the spear.
I know.
Now it's really short. Okay.
There we go.
I pressed escape like 4 times and that was the trick. Okay. So it's a Google Doc, like I said, and I have it downloaded in my Google Drive and it's continuously updated. And so it's really awesome. There are, I like how it includes terminology, and it's got some of the law, the ADA, and Title 2 and 3, and Section 504, and I love the organization of it. It's organized by just general, and then physical space, and electronic, and then accessibility for instructional design, and the terminology like I talked about. Something that I thought was kind of interesting is in the physical space accessibility, it talks about accessibility for meetings, and that's something I didn't even think about before. So a couple of years ago, I attended a webinar that we talked about accessibility in meetings, and it was interesting because they talk about like, before you conduct a meeting, ask your the participants if they have any accessibility issues, like maybe you would need to provide no format, or font size needs to be a specific size, or all kinds of different accessibility issues. So I thought that was interesting. And tools, it talks about, it gives you examples of tools and also the legal considerations. So lots of publications, a lot of research that they've done, and it gives you a lot of links to different places, like what IFLA has done, what the ALA ACRL has done. So overall, it's really helpful. So we'll go back to my PowerPoint, hopefully. And it's going to take me to the beginning, it looks like, unfortunately. So we'll have to go ahead to slide 24. Sorry about this. Okay, so in addition to good librarianship, it provides equal access to providing equal access to resources is also mandated by federal law. And because colleges and universities almost universally receive some sort of federal funding and or provide some type of public accommodation, even if they're privately owned, it's generally accepted that these laws apply to them under the Title II and Title III of the ADA. So those are things that I think continuing is really important to keep in mind. So some successes that we've had, we have a digital accessibility faculty mentor program. I'm a faculty mentor for the library, so what I do is that I provide staff with training on accessibility service standards, acceptable documents. I spend a lot of time helping people how to make accessible PDFs. We have LibGuides, and of course, if you include anything in the online, it has to be digitally accessible. So I also talk to them, do sessions about universal design principles or UDL principles. And I also gather feedback from students, staff, and faculty about the accessibility of library services and resources, and do informal surveys and polls and things like that. So we'll talk about Site Improve now. And so Site Improve is a program software that is for accessibility and for marketing performance. It's for academic audiences mostly. There are free website checkers out there, so if you're a web person, you probably know about the Wave tool from WebAIM, and those are really good places to start. But the thing I like about Site Improve, the interface is really simple. It's a paid thing, but the interface really easy to navigate, and it's got several modules that you can find broken links and misspellings, and you can check readability, and you can check accessibility against WCAG, WCAG, we call it 2.0. And if you don't know what that is, it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and if you're a web person, that's something that it's an international standard for online content, and it's sponsored by the World Wide Web Consortia, or the WC3. Those are things that, if you're a web person, it's constantly that you're thinking about. So our campus marketing initially purchased access only for them so they could check our USD site. But the library, we purchased a seat last year. And so we thought, since the institution bases their web standards against Site Improve, that the library, because we use LibGuides a lot, and we thought it'd be best to use it. So I wrote into our digital accessibility plan. I have a digital accessibility plan that I wrote for the library, that we aim to maintain a level of digital certainty index, which is DCI, and at about 87.2, and that's a higher education standard benchmark. So the digital site certainty for Site Improve looks at accessibility, search engine optimization, and quality assurance. So these are last year's goals. And our theme, we came up with a theme, and that helps us to do marketing and different things. Championing a digital accessibility mindset at USD. That's what we came up with. So I mentioned digital accessibility plans in the previous slide. There's a campus-wide plan, of course, and as I mentioned, I wrote one especially for the library. So for software reviews, we do HECVATs and VPATs. So if you haven't ever heard of that before, HECVAT, it's a higher education community vendor assessment toolkit. And what that does is it measures vendor risk. And so anytime anybody on campus, we think about picking up some software, we have to run it through IT. And then what they will be checking is if that software would store personally sensitive institutional information or personal information. And if it would, then we'd have to use a USB secure login, sign in. But if it doesn't, then like we picked up, let's see, what's an example? We picked up archive space a year ago or two ago, and and then you have to think about like who's gonna log into it, who's gonna be administrator, and is it just gonna be the library, is it gonna be students, who will have access to it, and what kind of information is it gonna provide. So a VPAT, if you haven't ever heard of a VPAT, that is a voluntary product accessibility template. And it's a document that's prepared by a product developer or vendor, and describes how well the product conforms to the accessibility standards of the Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act. And we look at a lot of our databases and see if they have vendor VPATs. And our library dean thought it would be best to align the library with what the campus is doing, and that's why, and to create buy-in. So that's why we use the same app, Site Improve, to access our online content that we have control over. So, as I mentioned, I created a digital accessibility plan to not only to create buy-in with the campus, along the lines of what the main campus is doing, but also to get everyone in the library on board with digital accessibility, or just accessibility in general, like not only digital, but also physical accessibility. Additionally, at the Dean's Council, often at admin level meetings, accessibility is talked about quite a bit, since we as a campus are putting a big stake on compliance on this. So the Dean really wanted the library to be a campus leader, and by having this digital accessibility plan in place, it puts us in a good position. So I'll show you my digital accessibility plan. I don't know how we put this one. What's that?
The library accessibility plan is showing this.
It's showing on Zoom, yep. Oh. Okay, I don't know what I did. So I've got it divided into different areas, executive summary, and accessible content is how I start. And then I also mentioned, like what I talked about that we will reflect WC3 standards and WKAA standards. And we will look at VPATs from vendors. And I thought what I'd do is show you a couple of different websites that I use to look at VPATs and information like that. So the Big Ten Alliance, this is the LAA again, the Library Accessibility Alliance. And the thing I like about it is that you can, it's got listed quite a few resources. So let's look at an EBSCO product and see what comes up. We'll do the academic search one. And so it will tell you what are the issues. And it looks like MSU was the one who did the research and consulting and tell you what the problems are. You know, there's some keyboard issues, it looks like, and things like that. And then on the right, it has a link to what EBSCO came back with their response. And, you know, all these things are really helpful for us as we're looking at the databases and things that we have. So another example, oh, that was the, okay, is the Midwest Collaborative for Library Services. And this is another one that will list a lot of the VPATs. And the thing I really like about this is, you know, before I talked about vendor language, so if you're going to negotiate with vendors about accessibility, this is a really good one for that. So let's pull up, on the right is the vendors that they have. So let's pull up Ambrose. And so again, there'll be VPATs, but also there's the license terms. So if that's something that you are doing or you're interested in doing, you can take a look and see what their license terms are, and they've got a worksheet that you can work through and all those kinds of things. So oops, it looks like you need to have a login to get into that one. But anyway, those are really, really helpful resources if you're looking at accessibility of vendors. And let's see if I can go back to my plan. Again, I pointed out that we're going to look at the DCI from Site Improve and make sure we have a score at or above 87.2. I think right now, last time I ran it, it was like 82, so we're doing pretty good. Initially when I ran it through, it was about a year ago now, and it was pretty bad. A lot of the problems were misspellings, so I had to get on people about misspellings, making sure that documents were accessible. Again, like I said, I talked to a lot of people about making sure their PDFs are accessible. If you are going to include a video in your LibGuide, you have to make sure you have transcript, you know, those kinds of things. So we did pretty good overall. And then I talk about different software programs that we have, making sure Those PDFs are accessible for things like archive space, Digital Library of South Dakota, make sure we've got videos and audio content, make sure we've got transcripts for the audio content and videos. And I provided VPATs for Alma and Primo, and our institution repository, make sure we align to conformance for WC3 and WCAG AA, and a little bit about instruction, a little bit about public services like interlibrary loan and course reserves, and then I kind of gave a little summary about collaboration. And again, I think it's really important to tie in what the rest of the campus is doing, and we work with CTL, that's our Center for Teaching and Learning, and we work a lot with them with our digital accessibility. So, going back to my PowerPoint. And we are going to talk about the Office of Civil Rights next, and that is slide 8. All right, Office of Civil Rights, OCR. And so what we are trying to do is to not get an OCR audit. Very important. Has anybody ever heard of Office of Civil Rights or ever been audited or anything like that? Okay. The Office of Civil Rights is a sub-agency of the U.S. Department of Education, and it focuses on enforcing civil rights laws prohibiting schools from engaging in discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, age, or membership in patriotic youth organizations. So I'm going to click on this link, and let's see how we're doing for time. Okay, we're doing pretty good. I just wanted to show you an example of what would happen if you got an OCR audit. Okay, and so you can search by state, and I'm going to go to South Dakota and pick on some of my colleagues at Dakota State. That's in Madison. So you would get a letter, and it would usually go to your person who's in charge, like your CIO, maybe the person who's in charge of the technology for your campus, like IT or something like that. And the kind of things that they did, so they audited them, this was last year, and the kind of things that they are picking on them about are, let's see if I can show some examples. Maybe it was the second one that I wanted to look at. It was website issues. Yeah, that's what I wanted to look at. So there was issues, so they did an audit of the online programs at DSU, and there was issues with their computer keyboards for navigation, so with people with a disability do not have access to content and functions. Also, there's problems with links. So alt tags and things like that, really important. So when you're doing LibGuides, you know, those are things important to always fill in your alt tags. And then the other issue was documents that were provided, they're in PDF or not. So that's why like I said, I spend a lot of time with my staff at the library talking about how to make documents accessible. And what will typically then happen is that they'll send a letter out to go with that, and it'll be to tell them what they have to do to fix it, how much time they have to fix it, make sure you're following, you know, WCAG and all those kind of guidelines. And as I said, this is a really big deal. If you haven't ever had to go through that, then that's great, but something that went out to everyone last year was a note from the Office of Civil Rights, and it talked about all post-secondary institutions, and if I get back to my PowerPoint, I'll show you that. Post-secondary institutions, this probably would have went out to all of your institutions, and you probably didn't see that, but it issued a Dear Colleague letter, and it reminds all institutions that they have to make sure their online services are accessible to all. And if there was now I don't know what the rhyme or reason for audits, like what happened with Dakota State, it probably happened that there was a student who brought up an issue, and then that's how the audit got implemented, but that's something that went out. So some things that we have done at USD for ideas. Digital Accessibility Awareness Day, we just did that a couple of months ago, so we have a lot of students that are on our Digital Accessibility Committee. And so we do things like talk about what are some of the new programs that have come out for accessibility, and of course having food and things like that. Digital Awareness Day we usually have in the fall. There's a new student org that we just started up for students with disabilities, and that's been really effective. As you know, is to try to get things going on campus. To have students be a part of that's really important. We do lunch and learns and some asynchronous videos. We're trying to make a lot of videos to teach not only students but also faculty and staff about the different things that we have available in digital badging. So for the last few minutes, I wanted to talk about some programs and things that people are doing in different institutions, in different libraries about accessibility. And it was nothing scientific, I just wanted to Google and just see what other institutions are doing. And so I'm going to do a web tour again, so please bear with me. I'll try to get out of my PowerPoint and go to the web and show you a couple of things. So the website, it's a LibGuide, and it's called More Able Than This. I love that title, More Able Than This, Accessible Music in America. So, try to get out of that. I just keep on clicking, and then it eventually goes away. And you can see that, right, Wendy?
Yeah, it's showing it's
Okay, More Able Than This, Accessible Music in Library in America. And this is from Georgia College and State University. And this LibGuide covers mostly limb differences and adaptive instruments. So we'll take a look at the tabs there on the left. So it talks about accessible music, some different research that they've put together, accessibility and universal design like I mentioned before. And another thing is accessible, they've got a blog that's kind of cool about the different things that are going on. That was 4 years ago, it looks like. The second example that I have on my PowerPoint, which I won't go to yet, I'm just going to do a web tour, is the Indiana University at Bloomington. So maybe I'll just do it this way. Bloomington, it's a really awesome institution, music library. And I'm sure most of your institutions, you guys provide these types of things. What I really like about this website is that they're actually they put on their website what is available for accessibility. So what they have, they say that their institution is an accessible and welcoming environment, and they really do have impressive services. So I'm going to click on technology, and like I said, just listing this kind of thing on the website is really important. And so it says, you know, they've got a workstation, it has adjustable height, headphones, and they've got different kinds of software, Zoom Text and JAWS, and text help. Those are all really great. And then I'm going to go to the borrowing services. And it says what they will do for their patrons, and they'll, like I talked about before, you know, locating and retrieving materials, finding digital versions of materials. That's something I do a lot. It's interesting. The CTO will contact me and say, the student needs access to this item. Maybe it's something they got from interlibrary loan, and it wasn't OCR, so it's an image, a copy of a PDF, not an accessible copy. So I'll go and, you know, try to find a version that is actually accessible. You know, all those kinds of things. And again, I'm sure your institutions do this, but actually having it on the website like this, I think is really nice. And I just like the way that they outlined it all. Another thing about Indiana is that they have a fellows program, which I thought was really cool. And so they've got this Jacobs School of Music Inclusion, Equity, Diversity, and Justice Fellows, and it looks like they did this in 2022, and it's a 3-day educational experience, curated cultural competency. And these are all the topics that they looked at. You know, something like that, that's pretty cool. And I always look to Indiana when I'm trying to get ideas. I think they're a really great music school. Another example that I wanted to show is the Library of Congress, and it's the NLS. So it's the National Library Service at the Library of Congress, and they have a free Braille and talking book library service. This was instituted in 1962, so it's got large print and Braille. And then they've got some things online. They've got recorded instructional materials and recorded materials about music and musicians, and all materials are circulated postage free, so if you have clients, this is a really great resource for that kind of thing. Like there it is, so you've got links to HTML, PDF versions of a lot of different things, some Braille scores, so this kind of stuff is online. And of course, you can contact them, get things that they can circulate to you, but there's some things online, so that's a really nice program. And the last thing I wanted to show is the Berkeley Institute for Accessible Arts Education, which I had never heard of before. Has anybody heard of the Berkeley Institute? It's in Boston. Boston,
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Pretty impressive. They have an institute just for accessibility. It's pretty cool. And so I'm going to click on programs. So they've got programs for people with disabilities. So if you've got a disability of all ages, you can participate in the programs. They also have degree programs for people that are interested in learning about music education and how to teach students with disabilities. And then also the professional development. So the Berklee College of Music is really a cool resource, something to look at of interest. So lastly, I will show my references. And thank you so much for allowing me to talk today. So what I'm really interested in is to hear about what you guys have done at your institutions about DEI and accessibility, and I'll answer some of your
So I have a comment of my own, but first I want to ask some information from Sarah Fouquier. She mentioned something that the LEA does, which I don't know if you mentioned this or not, but she said they coordinate accessibility testing library databases. She showed the URL. I'm not going to try to tell what the URL is, but they publish the results of that testing.
Yeah, the VPATs, and actually the VPATs come from the vendors, but what she's mentioning is that libraries do their own testing. Yeah, so that, like I showed that one example of Michigan and the different institutions. So it's really.
She also mentioned something called Wave.
Yep, the Wave tool, I mentioned that too.
So,
that's a free one. So I talked about site improvement, which costs in our marketing purchased it. But Wave is a free tool, so if you're a web person running it through the WebAIM, the Wave tool is really nice. The thing I don't like is that it's kind of hard to navigate, but yeah.
so I'd also like to share, like at DU, we have use Alma, Primo, and well, Alma's not an issue, but our public-facing catalogs on Primo, and it's advertised as 88 line tech. It is, but our user testing showed that because it has all the facets on the left, it's just awful for screen readers, and so our internal developers were able to move those to the right, and it's much easier for them to use.
That is something that was easy to do. We figured out that is something you can go in, and I didn't need my developers to do that. I could actually go in and back end and do that myself. But there's a lot of other things that are problems with Primo, and so you guys are awfully lucky that you have developers. Because it's like me, myself, and my staff person, and trying to figure out how to do any of that stuff. There's problems with alt tags, with buttons, and stuff like that, but just little things like moving the navigation over to the other side helps so much, I agree. But it is a problem, yeah.
I just wanted to follow up on that because it was something I was thinking about. I was really excited to see that there was language that has been created for doing negotiations and contracts with vendors. Because I remember when I was doing more work with this at previous institution, we talked about the fact that, well, at this library, we have control over our lit guides and over our website, so this is what we can do here, but a lot of it is out of our control with third-party vendors. So it's really exciting there's language, but what I'm curious is how successful has that been, like having that language in there. As Woody said, some of them technically do meet the standards, but there's still these frustrations with those databases and those tools still. I'm just curious if there's been discussion about how to strengthen the language to make it, or to try and advocate to the vendors to do more than they have.
Something I just thought of, we belong to a lot of consortiums because USD, we don't have a lot of money in the state of South Dakota, so we belong to Minitex. Anybody heard about that? It's a Minnesota consortia, and Lyrasis. I'm sure you guys have heard of Lyrasis. So if we belong to these consortia, that we ask them to help us do negotiations, we wouldn't have a whole lot of push because we're just little USD, but bigger consortia like Lyrasis and Minitex, we're able to have them help us do negotiations. So, getting some of the bigger people to help us with that seems to help us a little bit. Because, EBSCO, how are you going to fight with like ProQuest or something?
Right.
Yeah.
But you have seen like with those larger consortiums, or they've had more success in changing these platforms. But
I don't know about changing it right away, but just bugging them about it. And so that the second site that I showed, that Midwest Consortia, they will have like, Laura or Lisa or whoever mentioned about other institutions. Like I showed that example of Michigan doing a summary, and then you send that to the vendor. Having those things out in the public is really interesting, and everybody can look at it, and then the vendor will provide their response, and that's how things happen. Anybody else?
How did you get interested in this?
So about 15 years ago, a good friend of mine, Ernetta Fox, she was the director of disabilities. We started, I'm also a technology librarian in addition to fine arts librarian, and so different programs on campus were asking us to talk about what we have available for accessibility. So we talk about, we have Kurzweil and how do you use Kurzweil. If you've ever heard of that program or seen it, it's really difficult to use. And so we started doing presentations to like occupational therapy. They have a summer program where they all learn about accessible tools, software and hardware. And then we started presenting at library conferences about things like universal design and accessibility. We did a couple of sessions about, there's a ton of things out there about software and hardware for free, things that are for accessibility, like, you can go into your iPhone or your PC, and there's a lot of things that are free. So we did things like that. And as I mentioned before, our digital accessibility committee on campus, it's been about 5-7 years now, so I guess it was sort of accidental, but it's something that I've been doing now for about 15 years and gotten really interested in, so that's how I got involved. Thank you very much.